This is the keynote speaker for today. New Berlin. How did they get there?
Yeah.
It's a mystery. And that's how we got warped back to 1 in 1929. And Civil War, a war in Mars between 1945 and 1990, but you're not going to be covering that end of it, I think. Don't think.
Not quite.
Not quite. Well, without any more ado, Basis 2025 International Disclosure Conference welcomes Brad Olson.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, and Miles and I have been in touch with each other for years. In fact, I quote a conversation we had in my new book, which unfortunately I'm sold out of already. But it's not even supposed to be released until the end of this year. So these are just advanced reading copies. But Miles and I had several conversations online about the black goo, and there is some of that having to do with Antarctica. This is my second presentation on Antarctica because the first was when I took a sailboat from there to there across the Drake Passage, one of the most notorious stormy seas of the world. I got violently seasick for 3 days. I think I lost about 25 pounds on that trip. So if anybody needs to go on a crash course diet, even 50% of the people that take a cruise ship get seasick. And almost everybody who sails there or goes by boat leaves from a town called Ushuaia, southernmost city in the world, certainly in South America, Argentina. And just a couple interesting little tidbits from that trip. Of course, we were stamped into Argentina in our passports. When we left the day before, we had to go to the Argentine Navy, and they essentially stamped us out. We just had to give them our itinerary, which was the Palmer Peninsula, also known as the Antarctic Peninsula. And it was pretty weird because for 26 days when I was living on the boat, I was not stamped into another country. It was kind of like no man's land. So that was kind of weird, but the strangest thing was getting down there. And this is a frozen continent. It is 99% covered in snow and ice. In some places on the polar plateau, up to 3 miles thick. That is just one big sheet of ice. But Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. So there's 14 active volcanoes and 93 geothermal vents that are known. So what that means is this is the Trans-Antarctic Mountain Range, quite a few volcanoes. Mount Erebus is right here. It has a lake of lava that's there all year round. And under the ice, where there is geothermal activity, you have the propensity to create large domes under the ice. And that's going to play a factor as we go through it here. So just want to show you the extent of the sea ice. This would have been about a month ago. So right now, early December, late November, is the very first time that most people will travel down there. And until then, last winter, which is summer up here, 1,000 people is all there is on Antarctica. So when people tell you this planet is overpopulated, this is the 5th largest continent of the world, 1,000 people in total. So the area we're going to concentrate on is right around here. And it's called Queen Maud Land, or Dronning Maud Land is the word queen in Norwegian. It was a Norwegian claim, it still is on most globes. But the Germans took a liking to it as well, and they called it New Schwabenland. And you can tell because there's this little peninsula that sticks out there. And actually, that is going to play a role too when I show you some maps that were created by the Germans in the late 1930s, early 1940s, how they would navigate their U-boats under the ice. And I think this may be one of the first presentations to the Western world, because these maps have just been released by a Russian journalist. I'll tell you about him in a little bit. And it is just an amazing tale of what's underneath the ice here. So you can see right here, it would be probably about 1,000 miles just to go under the sea ice until you get to the continental landmass. Those mountain ranges all have German names, so forth. But let's go back a little bit to 1513, where you have the Piri Reis map. I mean, how many of you guys have heard of the Piri Reis map? Yeah, you sophisticated audience here. You guys all know. 1513, though, this is just less than 2 decades after Columbus made his voyage to a continent that he never, until his dying day, knew that he discovered. He thought he was in the West Indies. He thought he was in the islands below India. And that's why you have the misrepresented name West Indies and Indians for our Native Americans, because Columbus was lost. He never even knew he found a new continent. But Piri Reis clearly knew, because look at the shape of Brazil. And then it goes down to Antarctica. And this is the really interesting part here, because this is the Filchner ice shelf. And indeed, with scans that have been done, there are a series of islands down there, okay? Now, what's also interesting is you have animals down there. I can tell you there are no animals in Antarctica. The largest land creature is an insect about that big. It's the only thing that survives. There's no trees, no bushes, nothing really green. It's just ice. So 300 years before the official discovery of Antarctica, which was 1821, this Piri Reis map shows Antarctica without the ice, with land animals inhabiting the continent. So certainly the Anomalies Society studied this map thoroughly to give the Germans that almost mythical qualitative advantage coming into the war. How many of you ever heard of the Anomalies Society? We're going to get into that, and I'll explain who they were and what they were into, but they were into all the occultic, techno-magical advancements of the time. I'm half German myself, so in many ways, I'm just kind of in awe of these people. I'm half Norwegian, too, so maybe I've got a little claim to New Schwabenland. Other maps, which Hugh Newman is here. He always calls me out in his talks, says, Brad's here, he's a giant. Well, here you go, Hugh. Here's some Patagonian giants in an area called the Region of Giants on the Monte Urbano map, which would be down here. Not only does this map also show Antarctica about 250 years before its discovery, it also shows some of the inhabitants that once shared this realm. And you're right, Hugh, the Patagonian giants are a big mystery, and there's a whole chapter of it in my new book. And then we have Mr. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, one of my personal heroes. And here's a postage stamp that was commissioned by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who shows the flights he did. Some say he didn't quite make it to the North Pole in 1926, turned around a little bit prematurely, but not to belittle his accomplishment. And that was certainly in 1929, he was the first to fly over the South Pole. And there they are, getting ready for that flight. So he was the very first one to fly over it. And keep in mind, Scott and Amundsen, they only got there on overland just 15 years prior. So this is all very new 1912, Scott and Amundsen made that trip. Well, Amundsen made it in December, Scott 35 days later. You can imagine the disappointment on the British team who had been preparing for this for years, only to find the Norwegian flag flying at the pole. And by the way, Amundsen survived with all his crew because they were using dog sleds. All 5 members of the Scott party perished on the ice because they were pulling their sleds. And one of the reasons they failed and couldn't get to the last supply depot is they were carrying these fossilized rocks to bring back to your British society, to the museum, to bring back. Because at one time, Antarctica was a sweltering hot jungle, and the proof is in the fossil records. So they were collecting ferns, and there's even, in my other Antarctica talk, I show that there are a couple dinosaur species. Dinosaurs, of course, are cold-blooded. They can only live in very hot environments. And 2 species only in Antarctica. So here's Byrd's route in 1929, flying from Little America to the South Pole. But what's very interesting, you see in the blow-up, they get to the South Pole, it's not just a fist bump, yeah, we made it, turn around and go back. No, they flew about 150 miles out of their way. Why would they do that? You knew you made it, but they turned around and came back. But keep in mind this quadrant. This plays a very important role because he saw something, and that's why they flew overhead to check it out. So Byrd outlined 3 major goals for this expedition. This was actually his first of 5 trips. And the first goal was to add scientific knowledge of Antarctica, especially in areas of meteorology as well as geography, geology, and geomagnetism. Second goal was to explore the interior of Antarctica, especially Amundsen's route to the South Pole. Third goal, and certainly the most daring, was to fly over the South Pole, which he did. In 13 months spent on the Antarctic continent, the Byrd expedition accomplished all of its objectives and more. He was one of the greatest explorers of our time. So here are the maps of the South Pole as it is today. Here's the map of the whole continent. This is about where Little America was. Let me just flip back because this is very significant. See, Little America to the pole does that little route. That route was about here. This is where Byrd flew over, and this is called the clean air sector. Overflight below 2,000 feet is illegal, but who's going to fly transcontinental Antarctica over 2,000 feet? So there's another Antarctica person. I don't have to name him. He and I have had some squabbles online, and he's always saying, well, there is a no-fly zone, but you can fly over it. Well, nobody flies over Antarctica. Where are you going to go? I mean, it's so huge. South America's here. New Zealand's here. But very few flights do that. And South Africa is up here. But it also says overland transit prohibited except for essential purposes. Overland travel. Okay? So this is a blow-up of the blow-up. This clean air sector, that's where Byrd flew over. What were they doing? Why is this such a forbidden area? Well, I had the great opportunity to interview Brian S., who was part of a C-130 flight crew that encountered high strangeness from 1984 to 1987 while he was doing about 100 flights. Several times he and the crew all watched silver discs darting around, flying over the Beardmore Glacier. He said that what he described as an entrance to a human ET collaboration base. Those are his words. The hole in the ice. Now you notice, that is the same sector that Byrd flew over. That is a no-fly zone. That is the air sampling station, which I said, was there an air sampling station? No. He saw no evidence for it. It was a cover story to guard the hole in the ice. And this is what in our intelligence services would call the core secret. And this is why the NSA has been found to be on the South Pole Station as well as McMurdo. They have an unmarked building. They're kind of like the Area 51 in Antarctica. Everybody knows they're there, but it's the unspoken secret. So Brian S. had to do an emergency evacuation. And like I said, I talked to him. He was Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblower. Linda and I, Dr. Michael Sala, we all have done a lot of Antarctica research. And Linda was gracious enough to ask Brian if we could talk, and we did. And what he told me was that when they did the flight, it was a matter of life and death. They had to get someone here to get him off the Antarctica continent. Same thing happened to Buzz Aldrin, second man to walk on the moon. He needed an emergency evac. And so they defied the no-fly orders, because otherwise they would have had to go around and then go to Davis, so they went right over. The whole crew saw it. A gaping hole in the ice, several miles wide enough to drop a plane into. But here's what I found so interesting. From the South Pole Station, there were snowmobile and cat tracks, like you'd see grooming a ski mountain, that went from the station about 50 to 70 miles to the hole. And the road, there is a road that just corkscrewed down into the hole. That's amazing. So you have a land route, you have a flight route, and I'm going to show you the sea route to get to this same location within about 150 miles. So they do the South Pole flight, an emergency rescue to Davis Base. His crew made the diversion through the no-fly zone and spotted this massive chasm. They all discussed what they saw and attempted to fly over it again. So they come back, they drop the guy off. They're coming back and said, let's go look at it again. They discussed what they saw. They attempted to fly over it again, but were advised by ground command not to do so. Upon returning to McMurdo Station, Brian and his team were reprimanded and were told by their superiors, "You did not see what you just saw." His quote. But Brian did not have to sign a non-disclosure, and years later decided to speak out. He contacted Linda Moulton Howe. He said that the hole is located about 10 miles north of the South Pole Station. I've heard it's more like 50, which would be more indicative of that X. The air sampling station no-fly zone is a covered for secured airspace surrounding the massive hole with a snowmobile and snowcat road corkscrewing down into it. And so I told Linda and Brian that I'd like to go back and maybe try to explore this area. And they said, "You ain't going nowhere without the expressed written permission by the National Science Foundation." That's who basically runs the show via the NSA, the No Such Agency. And I would like to go here to the Schumacher Ponds in German, group of ponds. And these are hills around there. So here's actually a Nazi era map. Look at all these are German names named after the first explorers down there. the German pilot Schumacher stayed behind with his seaplane. This is in late 1938. And the expedition team set off for about a week. Some say base 211 is here in the Mühlich-Hoffmann Massif. Others think it's around here. I have another map from the high jump era where they were Xing off all the places that they were going to bomb during Operation High Jump, which is basically still classified information. So they found something, and they started work on Point 211 right away. Point 211 is kind of like Area 51. It's just the segment of map where they put their base. And the British knew about it. The British were paying attention to this in Operation Tamerlane. And I actually went to 2 of the spy stations on the Palmer Peninsula, part of the British claim to Antarctica. And they knew the Germans were shipping personnel and supplies all through the war years, all through the 1940s. Because after the New Schwabenland expedition, then it became top secret to the Germans. So that was really the only one that made it above ground. All the rest was pretty much secret. And so now, this is the Schumacher Ponds on Google Earth. This is what's known as an Antarctic oasis, or Antarctic desert, a place that never freezes. But what's interesting, there's no German base here, but there is a Russian base and an Indian base. My other colleague who does a lot of work on Antarctica, Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, she comes here to England a lot and does her conference. She passed on this book to me called Base New Berlin, which Miles just brought up. And in the book, which was all in German, he was of Indian descent. And I find it interesting that there is an Indian research station right here, because these lakes are extremely deep. So when Schumacher was doing his testing on them, first he found that the water got warmer the deeper he went, which proves that they are heated through geothermal activity. But he also found that they were extremely deep too. Deep enough that you could possibly drop a submarine in or surface. And if you blow up this area, and it's real easy to find on Google Earth, I highly suggest you all do that. Both of these stations have these long piers that stick out. This is such a big view, you can't really see them here. But there's something to do with the water at these stations. So what is it? Do they have an entrance to inner Earth? Many senior Nazi officers believed in the hollow Earth theory, proposing that planet Earth is entirely hollow or contains a substantial interior space, an atmosphere, inverted gravitational forces, and a selection of uniquely evolved animals and plants, which are heated by an interior spinning molten sun, or a black sun. We may have seen the black sun motif, which is in the Wewieselberg Castle. And by the way, just like the Nazi flag or the black sun motif is illegal in Germany. You can't fly either one of those flags. And I have a picture of a model Honeyboo aircraft, one of their UFOs they developed. You can't buy those in Germany. My friend David Hatcher-Childress, he had to order it through Turkey to get his model airplane. So this hollow Earth theory was all the rage in 1930 Germany. It was proposed by astronomers and leading scientists, including Edmund Halley, British scientists in the late 17th century, all believed there were advanced races of people living down there. So this is I would even say this one's an illustration as well, but certainly this one is, called Agartha, land of the advanced races, with a city of Shambhala and a cave system all through the surface of the earth, of course, entrances at both poles. And I still don't know how to really rationalize a hollow earth with a central sun. So that's why let's just leave that up to an illustration to give us an idea of what that is. But the Tibetans knew, and the Germans got it out. How many of you saw the movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt? Yep. Of course, they didn't show them going into inner earth, but he played Ernst Schaefer, one of the great German explorers of the time. And what they got out of it, one of the things, this is the original, which you would look at and say, oh, that's kind of a cool mandala. But when you go deeper, you have the emblem of the Anomalies Society. You have magnetic North Pole in the south, vice versa. This is the geographical South Pole. The Germans wrote in their notes. The Russians were the first to Germany after the war. And so they had first dibs on it too, and then they interpreted all these different symbols on the map. So immediately following Ernst Schaefer 1938 expedition to Tibet, the Germans wasted no time to go down to Antarctica. The very first summer down there, they went. So Ernst Schaefer comes back with something very important from Tibet. Not only this, which is a diagram to inner earth, but a whole lot of other stuff. And we think that not just any base, but based on ancient knowledge and directions from the Tibetans how to go under the ice. The Soviet secret police agency NKVD found the Germans were collecting this material since the 1930s, especially the Anomalies Society. Their supreme command decided to handle the case and understand what exactly the Germans found down there. So the NKVD, similar to our CIA or your MI5, they got the lion's share of this information. And then some other kind of maps like this, which I still don't know really what to make of it either, but you see a north and a south entranceway. And by the way, the Nazis were very active in the Arctic Ocean as well. They had a base in northern Greenland called Thule, T-H-U-L-E, or Thule. Russian explorer and author Nicholas Roerich led a 1924 expedition aimed at discovering Shambhala. So the Russians were into this as well. And he claimed that his spiritual masters, the Mahatmas in the Himalayas, were communicating telepathically with him, and these became the secret chiefs of German occultists, who in turn influenced Adolf Hitler and the High Command. So this is what the Anomalies Society was doing. They were looking into their ancestral roots, and they found that a lot of this has to do with this whole concept of inner earth. So then the Germans created their own maps of the inner earth. And these may be myself and Robert Seffer are the first to bring out these maps. At the conclusion of World War II, the Soviet Army was the first to capture the German Oberkommando DHS, OKH, headquarters in Berlin, where they found the files of the Ahnenerbe organization. The Ahnenerbe is therefore mentioned several times in this KGB ROM file, which was put together as a briefing for top Soviet officials, including Joseph Stalin. And we all know the Germans are very exact. So when they say dive 52.3 meters, that's what they mean. And you can see here, under the ice, up to a lake, dive again, and then they go to a place called the Lighthouse of Agartha. So this is the angle that the U-boats would make, top view of the side view. And then you have these other maps, which show Antarctica without the ice, but all these very strange names. So here's a close-up of the submarine route and the diving instructions. So they found these documents and others also in the Kriegsmarine headquarters, including the sailing directions and commander notebooks. Soviet intelligence experts were the first to figure out what these documents were. And there's things here that are astronomical. So when I was working on this book for the last 3 years, but about a year ago, I did a interview with Agi Nost on Alpha broadcast, and he says, oh, I have this friend in Europe who's really into Antarctica. You want me to put you in touch? I said, yeah, of course. And his name is Frank de Kamer, and I might get a chance to meet him in Germany in May when I head there. And so he has been the one who has been interpreting a lot of these, passed them on to me, and a whole lot more. And so there is providence for the authenticity of these. And in this case, on each one of the maps is a unique number signed by a top admiral with a stamp. And the Soviets later confirmed the given coordinates of the German U-boat routes under the ice from this KGB ROM file, from the research of the Ahnenerbe. Besides the precise location, they refer to their own Soviet naval underwater mission to that same place. So right after World War II, the Soviets tried to follow the U-boat route with their own submarines. Amazingly, when the Soviet subs reached the under-ice entrance, they were met by menacing submersibles that forced the Soviets to turn around. This is in late 1945, and as we'll see the following year, the Americans go down with a military expedition called Operation High Jump. So here is this journalist. Let's see if this is going to play. Just added this today. Not going to give us the sound? I don't know. No, it's going to play Pearl Jam instead. But what I want to show here is the providence. We can kill the music. It's in Russian anyways. That this can just play over and over. So you'll see him flipping through the maps, okay? So he says he has held in his hand over 30 of these maps. And there he is looking at them. And they're different versions of this undersea. So you have the more solid cover ocean. You could see them going through the transition every year they were made. They kept getting better and better, right? The Japanese have a word for that. It's called kaizen. You always improve upon what you do the year before, and you see that in these maps as well. So these strictly confidential maps and directions were written specifically for the commanders of the U-boat. And this journalist, Nikolai Subotin, he came into possession of them at the end of the Cold War. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, you could show up in Moscow with a suitcase full of hard currency or gold and silver, talk to the right people, alien autopsy videos, crash sites, and Antarctica research all came out of the Soviet Union to the highest bidder. He says he got them in the black market at a so-called flea market. And let's see if we can see the timestamp here. August 2nd, 2022. So that's how recent this information with these maps are. So this guy, Subotin, he got a whole bunch of stuff. Not just these stacks of maps, but this little blue book, which is also part of this clip. If we have time, I could play it, the video at the end. It's called Wolf's Secret Notebook. And here he is just describing how he came into them.
I have about 30 of them in my hands at one time.
Oh.
Well, and here I'll show you the end again.
Here's the pyramids, which he thinks is where the U-boats were heading. But Frank Takamer and I, we calculated it at a different location, closer to the South Pole. And again, these are very exact directions. So this is the Wolf's Secret Diary. He's one of these guys. And he's taking notes while Adolf Hitler is giving a speech. Look at the date. October 1st, 1940. They already had the base established. Because the Fuhrer says, the joint and organized research of our scientists, sailors, and submariners of the Kriegsmarine have achieved the impossible, and successful work of the SS departments in the field of the ancestral earth of the great empire have decreed to us grant new and infinite territories for the German Reich to discover in Antarctica. They are under the ice of the South Pole. In connection with the development of the new territories, I order within the next 6 months to carry out a careful and covert selection of volunteers for the encirclement of the new territories of the German Reich in New Swabia, with the forces of the specially formed commission for recruitment in the Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine, and in the units of the SS. These are the direct orders of the Führer. And also, this is a letter. Well, this is it written out. There's still some more there. Goes on, the commission working on the selection of candidates must take into account that the volunteers will say goodbye to the fatherland forever and will be sent to New Swabia for a permanent stay. The measure to relocate the best candidates from them who work on the selection of candidate ranks of the military via the SS members must be carried out under strict secrecy. As the person responsible in the Reich for the resettlement of a portion of the population of purebred Aryans to New Swabia and for ensuring the secrecy of this action, I appoint Reichsleiter Martin Bormann, who at the end of the war was the number 2 in charge. And Martin Bormann, interesting fella, he was put on trial in Nuremberg, found guilty. He wasn't there in absence, and his sentence was to be put to death if they ever caught him. They never caught him, and he keeps popping up all over South America in the 1950s. And when I was down there 7 years ago, on my way to Antarctica, we went to a bunch of locations that were these German micronations. So about the size of our small states, or about the size of Wiltshire here. And the Germans bought up huge land parcels in Chile, in Argentina, and Brazil. And Martin Bormann was the money man. Did you know that many metric tons of gold, excuse me, left Germany, along with some priceless artifacts, such as the Spear of Destiny and other artwork, never to be seen or heard from again. So the Germans were very wealthy at the war because they had accumulated all the wealth of the countries they had captured. And that wealth disappeared, including in the central bank. So they kicked out the Rothschilds. That was one of the things that the Germans loved about Hitler, is he got rid of the central bankers. In fact, they arrested one of the Rothschilds in Austria. And it was, I think the British royal family negotiated his release. But the Germans started their own currency, did very well with it. That was kind of the German miracle in their economy in those years. And so they are pouring it into, of course, the war effort, but also into their new colony. Because Germany was very overcrowded, very small country. They needed land. They needed it bad. And they found it in Antarctica. So not only did the Army and Navy take part in this expedition, but so did the U-boat fleet and the flags of the Kriegsmarine, which, by the way, that's the Southern Cross. You can only see that constellation in the Southern Hemisphere. So why are the Germans putting that on their flag unless they have full intention of relocating a sizable population in Antarctica? On the low end, I've heard that number is about 200,000. On the high end, 2 million. That's a lot of people at the end of the war. And all through the war, too, by the way. Oops, go backwards. And there's a whole bunch of other evidence that Frank found, including passports to New Schwabenland, Base 211, New Berlin, and for the officers, the Führer's convoy. So at the very end of the war, the largest U-boat fleet left Germany, which was called the Führer's convoy. Oh, thank you. I could use that. So I'm sure a lot of you know that Germany was building hundreds of these U-boats, menacing the UK, the US, our shipping routes. Over 100 of those U-boats still have yet to be found. Where'd they go? They built more U-boats in 1945 in the last 5 months of the war than all the way through the war. So there was certainly a major effort on their part to build these. And at a certain moment, they reached the number of 1,000, then started to replace the destroyed U-boats with new ones and gave them the IDs of the old ship. So there were, quite a few U-boats that got renamed. So a whole bunch. And here they are going down there with the Führer's convoy, with these passports to New Berlin. And then this is one of the last generations of these maps when it comes very clear what we're looking at. And all of these names from the Valkishir Ocean, which is also named there, the southern entrance, New Schwabenland, New Berlin, and the U-boat fulcrum of the German Navy. So the U-boats could come in, get repairs, drop stuff off, And then they carry on. The city of the Aussies, Sangrin Islands, and on this side is Shambhala, city of the gods. So this could be northern hemisphere or northern under the ice, and this is certainly southern under the ice with this entrance that goes, like I showed you on the very first slide, you go under the ice for about 1,000 miles before you get to the continental landmass of Antarctica. So on the left, we can see the U-boat harbor. There's an island named New Schwabenland. In the north, the city of the Aussies. Why this island of the mountains, Sangin, is also marked remains unclear. These are Frank's notes. I assumed it to be explained in another set of maps, of instructive maps that is being mentioned on the larger map, of which this is a cutout, and was only to be opened after reaching the lighthouse of Agartha, which is not shown here, but it is mentioned on the description. So Frank did a colorization here to make it easier. This is land, this is ice, this is a lake, there's a U-boat following those same directions. And then here are, in German, on one of the map sets, Agartha, by name. So dive at the point where the coordinates tie the exact junction of the southern latitude with the eastern latitude. This is how Frank determined where this route was. The diving point, the difficult maneuvers, the sailing on the surface of the cave, and then when you get to the lighthouse of Agartha, further instructions in package 3, which has not been found, but that was to tell the crew and the captain how to deal with the people of this under ice realm. So here's what Frank plotted out based on these maps. And there's that little peninsula I showed you on the first slide. So they're coming in under this sea ice. They get to the continental landmass. They dive down. They come up to the lake, dive down again. And where do they end up? Within 150 miles of the South Pole. So now there is sea route. There is the land route that Brian S. saw, and there is the flight route that Admiral Byrd in his diary describes flying into. So New Berlin was a science city. And I have some military documents from Captain Mark Richards, who Carrie Cassidy interviewed 12 times. And I bought his book on Operation High Jump from his wife. He's in jail still. But incredible documents that describe the New Berlin Science City, and which Admiral Byrd described as was told to him was the domain of the Ariani. And is it the mythical land of Agartha or all of these combined? And then you have this letter, which turned up. It was sent in 1947. This is the original here. He says, "Dear old comrade, this message will be a surprise to you. The U-boat 209 has made it. The earth is hollow. Haushofer and Hess were right. The entire crew are doing well, but they will not return. We are not prisoners. I am sure that this message will reach you, and it is the last connection with the U-209. We will again meet, comrade. I am worried for the world which your lives are on the surface of the earth have to be spent now that the Führer has gone. God bless our example Deutschland. With kind regards, Karl Unger." And this is a letter of authenticity, that his family recognized the handwriting. His friend also vouched for it. And everything about it, from the paper it was written on to the ink, describe it. So just like that Führer letter, they were looking for people that were willing to make that one-way trip and maybe never come back. So they were very, very advanced with their U-boat fleet. Many of those scientists that worked on these U-boats came over to America with Project Paperclip. You guys got your share as well. So did France, and a few went to Canada. A few went to Russia, but they were the ones that didn't want to go. Most of them went to America, and they worked on our submarine fleet. So 1943, Admiral Karl Donitz said the U-boat fleet had found a magnificent shelter protected from all winds and bad weather for our Führer, an impregnable fortress at the other end of the world. So another schematic for the map, another base, which this is an image from Google Earth, which is very similar to this, being able to fly in and out of, and the underground network. Most of the underground bases, well, we're at the bases conference, so we should talk about this, were built from the technology of the Germans. They were very well advanced. So when they built Fortress Europe to protect Western Europe from attack, they were burrowing underground in the early 1940s. They were called the TOT, T-O-D-T. That was the name of a German engineer that had created the ability to burrow and create like these animal farm type structures, bases underground. And there's not one of these, but two of them in this one area in southern New Schwabenland. So I think that is the Thule Refuge in New Schwabenland. 3 different bases I've identified in the book. The New Berlin base, Point 211, and the Thule Refuge. And here's where you guys were the first to find out the Germans were doing what they were doing in New Schwabenland. This is where I went. Actually, I'll show you. Came over on a sailboat. First island we got to was out here. Then we came in the Bransford Strait. We got down to the Vernansky base, which is here. And then came back to the Melchior Islands, back to Cape Horn. This is called Port Lockroy. There's your British flag. Some penguins running around. It's now a museum. There's a post office there. You can mail your postcards. And both of them were spy stations of Operation Tambourine. The British secret war in Antarctica took place during World War II, just before Operation High Jump. So they were sharing information with the Americans who were spying on the Nazi activity. Basically, they're picking up on the U-boat transmissions. The very last cable that the head of the Luftwaffe sent was to Terra del Fuego. And he was on trial at Nuremberg, and he was put to death. Well, actually, he popped a cyanide cap because he was hoping to get out with the rest of them. But they had to do a trial at Nuremberg to do a dozen or so top officers, and they were all found guilty as well. These British spy stations were actually very clear what they were up to. And you can walk in them. There are no locks, and there's still cans of food on the shelf. Hermann Göring was the one who sent that cable to Terra del Fuego. So we knew that they were doing a lot of activity down here. And so the Brits shared their info with the Americans, who then put together Operation High Jump. Here's some headlines from 1941, May 1941, before the U.S. even got involved in World War II. Nazi base in Antarctica reported, and it was also in the New York Times. It ran kind of on the wire. Several other newspapers ran this headline. So this is a very important map because it shows the very day that World War II ended. This is what Germany was still in occupation of. So Berlin goes down, but not Hamburg, not Norway. And these were the biggest bases of the U-boats. So they were still sending out their U-boats from the docks of Hamburg and Norway till the very last day of World War II. There are over 100 submarines escaping Europe into the North Sea. We always hear that saying that history is written by the winners. History was written by the Americans and Brits, because what they don't tell you is the last battle of World War II, and this is in Joseph Farrell's book and Henry Stevens' book. There was a huge U-boat battle. Well, again, it was very one-sided. It was the U-boat just basically blasting their way through the North Sea, up here to Iceland, and that was the Führer's convoy. The war is already over, and over 100 U-boats are escaping Germany. So the Soviets have first dibs. They're the first to get into Berlin, and this is the Navy headquarters. This is the Kriegsmarine. You can see it's already pretty much blown out in the center of Berlin. And this is General Murkov. And he's basically the one who goes through, sifting through all of these documents. And the Soviets had their own Operation High Jump when they tried to get their submarines down there and got turned back. So the Germans got permission to go. The Soviets in late 1945, just months after the war ended, get turned back. And so as quickly as they could, the Americans go down there in Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Byrd himself. Shortly after the Allies claimed unconditional victory of World War II, Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, who is good friends with Admiral Byrd, and both would die prematurely, sent a naval task force in 1946, including Admiral Nimitz and Cruzen, both pictured here, given an operation named High Jump. Its outward mission was to map the continent and train troops for frigid air fighting. Well, gosh, they could have done that in Greenland or Alaska. Why do you have to go all the way down to Antarctica to train troops? Admiral Byrd gave a press release right before he left, and he said, "Our mission is military in nature." And it's now known that his mission was to get these flying craft. Because the Brits had intelligence on it, the Russians did, the French did, and so did the US, that the Germans were creating these exotic flight craft that used zero-point energy and were basically anti-gravitics, that were basically tricking gravity into thinking, well, they created a gravity field around them. Very, very advanced. When it was certain Germany was going to lose the war, and this is in 1943, the Nazis started moving their top secret operations dealing with atomic testing, advanced weapon development, and flying discs to New Berlin via the under-ice U-boat transport route, which by then was already well established. Towards the conclusion of the war, the city was fully operational and allegedly continued to operate long after the war was over. So in Captain Mark Richards' military documents, he goes on to say that they also needed to destroy the New Berlin base, which they did not. So the Science City continued unabated. These exotic Nazi aircraft and weapons were used in the decisive defeat of Admiral Byrd in early 1947, and that is what we reproduced on the cover of my new book. And here is the Hanibu fleet, including the early renditions. You can see the size is quite different. Here is the model aircraft that David Hatcher Childress had to buy from Turkey. I mean, you can build models as a kid of the Hanibu 2, which is this one, which is the one that got weaponized. The evolution of the German and Vril Hanibu flying saucer program, seen in this chart, from prototype to fully functioning aerospace combat craft. And the outside of the, you even see the inside of this craft, which is very similar to this design. And you cannot buy that in Germany. So, again, if history were really to tell the true story, the Germans were the first to outer space, beat the Russians there by decades. First to the moon, first to Mars. We'll see if this comes out. It might, because on the back of my book, the headline is, "All roads lead to Antarctica." Of course, no roads lead to Antarctica, but all of this stuff leads there. And by the end of January 47, the Aviation Survey of Antarctica continent, which began into the Queen Maud Land, where it was suspected the Germans had landed, both the eastern and western group. So by the way, high jump split into 3 groups. Admiral Byrd stayed near Little America, and the high jump ships that the eastern and western group both were off of Queen Maud Land. They were the ones who were making moves. And the German claim of New Schwabenland, everything was going to plan in the first few weeks. Tens of thousands of aerial photographs had been taken. They're both mapping it out. But then the discs came out of the caves and from the ocean. The U.S. Naval Task Force confronted these flying discs at sea on February 26, 1947, also known as the Battle of High Jump or the Battle of Antarctica. It was a decisive, one-sided victory for the Germans. It was all over in about 20 minutes. One saucer that emerged from the ocean used a directed energy weapon to slice the USS Murdoch in half. Other saucers appeared to come from holes in the ice. The Allies lost a destroyer and almost half of their carrier-based aircraft, plus dozens of sailors and officers in the Murdoch, who quickly succumbed to hypothermia. And this is what it was all about. Byrd was to seek and destroy any of the bases, but more importantly, to capture a craft. And this was a direct military assault to capture this technology, and he was met by a superior dish-shaped aerial craft that could move at incredible speeds. So he's coming out of Antarctica 2 months into the 6-month expedition with unlimited funding from the Navy. Navy had never done that before. The first 3 trips Admiral Byrd took were basically self-financed. He found sponsors. So Edsel Ford, for example, paid for the plane that he flew to the South Pole with on the first trip. And so when the battle took place, these UFOs, as we would call them, now we know that they're the Hanibu, and there's even a mothership called the Andromeda with one Hanibu here and then a couple virile craft, the smaller ones, like scout ships there. So designs for 3 kinds of these craft, including anti-gravity mothership, a cigar-shaped craft. Wow, pretty reminiscent of what your whistleblower, who discovered the records in the Johnson Space Center, said he saw a cigar-shaped craft. That was, what's his name? That they tried to expedite up. Gary McKinnon found a cigar-shaped craft. I wonder if it was this, or maybe something the Americans backward engineered. So these craft came easily, outmaneuvered U.S. planes, and disabled key naval assets with advanced energy weapons. So at the time, it must have seemed very frightening to the U.S. troops to encounter something like that. Byrd said it was military in nature, expedition, seek out Base 211. On his way back, Byrd gave an interview that ran in El Mercurio newspaper in Chile, and he said, quote, "In the event of a new war, the U.S. would be facing military craft that can fly from one pole to the other at incredible speeds." Well, gosh, as far as I know, they have not revealed any craft that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. So here's another representation from Frank. And now you can clearly see here's the South Pole. This is where Byrd flew over. So this is about where the hole in the ice is. And then this is where the U-boats could get to the lighthouse of Agartha, or the city of the gods. So Byrd was good friends with James Forrestal. Here he is giving him a stuffed penguin. A little gift. And both men would be dead within a few years, despite both of them being in excellent physical condition. It's said that James Forrestal is the first casualty of the disclosure movement. He was the first head of our Department of Defense, and he was also part of MJ-12. And as part of MJ-12, he was sworn to secrecy, but Byrd told him everything. And he was known to be walking up and down the halls of our Pentagon saying, "The Nazis have UFOs down there. They got flying saucers. We don't know what to do with it." And that was enough for Truman to say, "Okay, you're going to Bethesda." He couldn't even see his family, and he kept talking. He kept talking. He kept talking to the hospital staff at Bethesda, and then he fell out of the top floor of the hospital building. Admiral Byrd, unfortunately, also met an early demise, but not until he went back to Antarctica for the 5th time. And this was called Operation Deep Freeze. And in Captain Mark Richards' documents, he says that it was the Germans who wanted to strike up an uneasy alliance. What did America want more than anything? One of those UFOs. So they landed one on a plane in deep freeze and took it back. And that was Admiral Byrd's last trip. But his son and his nephew published a book. The son found his diary, a secret expedition journey to a paradise inside the earth. Interesting choice of words. And then Admiral Byrd's son, who was Richard Byrd III, was also in the Navy. He was a junior officer and went along with his dad on Operation High Jump. So after Byrd gets back, he does this, do I have this on here? this interview with Longines. Yeah, here it is. Let's see if this works.
Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North
Listen to
Pole and the
this.
South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this Earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole, on the
Beyond
other
the
side of
pole.
the South Pole, from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
This is a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Admiral, do you hope to see that?
We've found enough coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
That's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
well,
It was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
is it any secret? Is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff down there.
Well,
You know, I avoided what you said about uranium. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to have the world fighting over the Antarctic.
Admiral Byrd, is there a competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are now 7 nations very much interested. Russia is interested tremendously. That I'm sure of. Australia has an expedition down there. The Argentine, the Chile, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. Now, you can understand those people down there being interested because they live down there, the New Zealanders, the Argentinians, the Chileans, and Australians. And so we don't do much about claiming anything.
Admiral, you make
Do we-
this sound a little crowded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Well, Admiral,
The government.
Admiral Byrd, may I ask you, is there a great difference between the top of the world and the bottom of the world?
There is. Now, the North Pole is the center of an ocean 10,000 feet deep. The South Pole, the center of a plateau 10,000 feet high. The North Polar Sea is surrounded by continents slightly frozen. The Antarctic continent is surrounded by a belt of ice, frozen seas of at least 1,200 miles thick. Now, the South is a plateau. It gets, in some places, 14,000 feet up. I've been over areas about 13,000, and it's a little bit chilly up there. So there's that big difference between the top and bottom of the world. The North really isn't very cold up there on the Arctic Ocean. Compared to the South.
Okay,
Admiral Byrd-
so interesting what he said at the very beginning, that there is beyond the pole on the other side of the pole. Well, up on the polar plateau for hundreds of miles in all directions, supposedly there's nothing. So he's speaking in very veiled terms. But when he came back from high jump, he was told, you're a military man. You're never to speak of this. He even writes about it in his diary. Gag orders, sworn to absolute secrecy. So his public statements were minimal. And so then this is after Operation Deep Freeze in 1957. He would be dead months later. So I think he was revealing a little bit too much to make them comfortable. And he died of a heart attack in his bed. But before that, between high jump and deep freeze, you have all of these UFOs swarming over the Capitol. And Admiral Byrd must have known what types of craft those were flying over D.C. in late July 1952 when the headlines read, "Saucers swarm the Capitol." A second sighting happened 4 days later, but the dispatcher fighter jets says right here in the article that they didn't even go up the second time. There were 2 flyovers of D.C. They stayed on the ground. Air Defense explained, "We were just too busy with other things, and besides, these objects aren't hurting anything." So according to Laura Eisenhower in her book, Awakening the Truth Frequency, and interviews she's done with Dan Cooper, her whistleblower, the U.S. surrendered. This is a part of history nobody really talks about. After this second flyover, Dan Cooper says they went down to our White House and they didn't want to get attacked again. And they, by the way, they dropped the Nazi from their name. They prefer to be called the Antarctica Germans. And they didn't want another high jump, so they negotiated a truce. And that truce is what's now known as the Antarctica Treaty. Because in the Antarctica Treaty, you're not allowed to do any kind of testing, especially nuclear bomb testing. And let's see, is it going to let me go there? Yes, because now even science is doing the scans, much like what occurred on the Giza Plateau a few months ago. They're doing this in Antarctica, and they're finding it's an entirely different world down there with its own ecosystem, with flowing rivers and lakes that don't freeze. And as I said in the beginning, large domes from all that geothermal activity. So it would make sense that there are holes in the ice, like the one at the South Pole, and I've identified a few others that the heat needs to escape. So maybe we are looking at the hidden world being this some kind of hollow earth. But you don't even really need to go into the earth necessarily, because the hidden earth is just this plate of land, which is basically part of Pangea. It's 3 billion years old, whereas Western Antarctica, the portion I went to, the reason why there's such dramatic mountains there is because this portion came down from the mid-Atlantic ridge. And in fact, the locations that Dr. Sala has given me GPS coordinates of some kind of civilization under the ice, they all appear in Western Antarctica. But those maps show under the ice Antarctica here. And this is all being confirmed with these new studies scanning under the ice. And here's some examples of what those scans have produced. Clear grid patterns, even pyramidal structures, and even the mainstream media, like the Sun, reports on a lost world, huge structures found buried beneath half a mile of Antarctic ice. Sure to send Atlantis conspiracy theorists into a meltdown. I guess that's me. I'm melting down up here because your Sun reports on a lost world under the ice in Antarctica. So fast forward to today, and the bases of the cabal, here we are with bases again, are still there. The Germans never left. In fact, they have their bases to this day still there. So I was going over maps before my trip 7 years ago. I came across all the bases in Antarctica during the Cold War. West German flag, they stayed. They never left. So according to whistleblower testimony and remote viewers, there are still at least 5 bases under the ice that are run by the interplanetary corporate conglomerate. If you saw Drago's presentation yesterday, he spoke about this. And here are some of their other locations in Antarctica, and a corporate-directed secret space program operating out of Antarctica. These 5 interplanetary corporate conglomerate bases have been targeted by remote viewers. They report these locations are geothermal-powered cities with human workers. And they also said that there are cloning operations in Antarctica, and really dark programs where they're combining the DNA of humans with animals, which are known as chimeras, and some really dark and twisted things in this lost world. But on the surface, there are also, sometimes Google Earth lets us see it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll put a white square over it. But these look like pyramids to me, with steps going up, snowmobile tracks, and clues to an advanced civilization can be found in Google Earth, and deep under the ice as well. Appears to be step pyramids here, and the plan to a square city plan. Keep in mind that Mother Nature does not create in perfect right angles. Here's some more images from the remote sensing photography, and I sense I'm almost out of time here, but I'm almost done. These newly discovered landscapes, the fossils of extinct creatures and mysterious cosmic and radio waves. This is the other thing that's coming out from Antarctica. They're getting signals coming from deep within the ice, maybe even below the continental shelf. This was another thing that Dr. Salas said, look into when you get down there, that these cosmic rays, which normally always hit the Earth, but in Antarctica, they're coming out. And where are they coming out? Pretty close to the South Pole, like right out from the hole there. Emanating some kind of advanced technology, suggesting an inner world we're only beginning to understand. And I think we can see some evidence for advanced civilization down there. This is also in New Schwabenland. You can go on the Google Earth Wayback Machine to the year 2013. Runway strip, snowmobile tracks, some kind of digging. Emery Smith says this is a door that goes to a larger craft. The remote viewers from the Farsight Institute did a remote view of here and says it's some kind of massive, intelligently built craft for very, very tall. You guys think I'm tall. To the ceiling tall type of beings that once worked out of there. So Operation High Jump, if history were to be told correctly, was the primary catalyst for the modern era of UFO secrecy. It led directly to the creation of the CIA and the vast, unaccountable military-industrial complex designed to manage this unseen threat and attempt to replicate this technology. And that's what I got for you guys. So I thank you very much. This is the new book. Unfortunately, I've sold them all out here, but let me just show you one last thing. I will be at this UFO conference in Germany where I'm going to meet Frank, my research assistant, and also this gentleman here, Lothar Lauer, the emissary to Inner Earth, in which I plan to talk to him and see about going back to Antarctica and maybe going down into this inner Earth and being an emissary for us humans up here. Well, thank you guys so very much.
Thank you, Brad Olson.